We are live, ladies and gentlemen. You're once again welcome to the King Dems Podcast. And today I have a very important guest. Please make welcome with me, Jim Marshall. How are you, Jim?
Hi, Dems. Good to see you.
Wow, I am very happy to have you on the podcast. And of course, thank you very much for taking the invitation on such a very short notice. I like to say something. The SI unit of measuring life is time. And when somebody shares their time with you, they share their life with you. And gratitude is good attitude. So I am very grateful on behalf of myself and viewers of the King Dems Podcast. We are very grateful to have you on here to share your deep insights, hindsight, and of course, foresight. You're once again welcome. Delving into the man, the myth, and the legend. Jim, you describe yourself as the discoverer of unknown natural phenomena. Can you share what led you to this discovery and how Septimics was born?
Sure. Well, the story really starts. Before I do that, let me just give one sentence so there's some context for your viewers so they have some
Okay.
idea of what I am and who we're talking about. I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I created a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septimics and published in the book Septimics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. Now, to answer your question, the story really begins when I was accepted into engineering school at the age of 16. Now, of course, I thought at the time that I was going to be engineering physical things, such as airfoils and motors and gears and electrons and that sort of thing. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear to me that I wanted to engineer the human psyche because it is the area of greatest mystery, of greatest unknown, and more importantly, it is the area in which we as a race are failing miserably. 95% of the problems in industrialized society are because people don't understand people. Don't
That's
understand the
true.
wife, don't understand the son, don't understand the boss, don't understand the business partner. That's why all over the world people routinely elect morons and criminals to run their governments because they don't understand them. And this book fixes that across 35 axes. So, to make a long story short, I had a long career as a human development engineer, working one-on-one with hundreds of clients of every description for cumulatively many thousands of hours. Now, all of my clients benefited from our interaction, but I started to notice incidentally that I could predict the outcome of the session. I never told this to anyone, but I made notes. And as the years rolled by, it became obvious to me that the client was at a specific level on a specific scale that I had previously observed and recorded. And as a result of this session, he would go to the next level up on that scale. Now, this happened thousands and thousands of times. And every time it did, it verified my hypothesis because the clients knew nothing about what I was doing or what I was thinking, what I was recording, or anything. All they knew is they came into me with a problem or an unwanted condition, and I helped them with it. So, by 1995, I had actually observed and recorded about 32 scales that had just fell out in front of me in the sessions, and I just wrote them down. They have to realize after I would see it in a session, I would then go out in the world and see the same thing. People who didn't even know me were manifesting these same things. So it just verified my hypothesis. So in 95, I was once pondering a difficult client, and I had this 6-level scale that I knew was correct. But I realized one day that this client was at a level on that scale that I had not previously observed. In other words, it actually had a 7th level. As soon as I saw what this level was, I knew where to insert it. That was not a question. And as soon as I inserted the 7th level into the 6th level scale, that scale at that moment manifested mathematically. It went from being a line, which is what a scale is, to a plane, meaning a whole body of data. And all of these mathematical implications jumped out at me. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. The whole point of math is you start with a formula or an equation, and you coax data out of it. That's how Einstein, for example, found E equals mc squared. There's no mystery about how he did it. He gave us the steps. So that when you see mathematics present themselves like that, it's a mathematical manifestation. So I said, whoa, I don't know what I found here, but whatever it is, it has to be natural law because it's got mathematics embedded in it. Then I thought, I wonder how many of these other scales are actually 7-level scales that had not been developed all the way because I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. So knowing what I was looking for, I then inspected all of these other scales. And in a short period of time, each of them developed into a 7-level scale. And when it did, it manifested mathematically. So in a short period of time now, I had 32 7-level scales, each of which had mathematics embedded in them. And I said to myself, this looks like a new subject to me because I went to school for 28 years and I never saw anything like this. So then I thought, I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I had been doing as human development engineer, to helping people by the millions if I put this in a book and get it out so people can use it. So I'm going to have to write a book. So the first draft was finished in December of 95, and I, upon completion, sent it to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of subjects. And they all replied swiftly that they loved it. They had different responses, but distinctly positive responses. And that told me that this was exactly what I thought it was, which is a new subject that could really help people. I then spent the next 25 years of my life writing the book. Because you have to realize, first I had to discover the phenomena, and I pretty much explained how that occurred, although I did find 3 more scales as I was writing them. Then I had to take that data and I had to use it to craft a workable philosophic system. Now, as an engineer, I'm only interested in results and facts. To engineering, opinions and beliefs are utterly irrelevant. So I had to craft something that would work all the time for every person who could read English, because obviously the book is in English. So that took 20 years. Now you realize there are 35 scales, each of which has 7 levels. So there are 245 different levels, each of which had to be ascertained, verified, and then expressed in a way that would make sense to the average reader. The most time-consuming aspect of this was expressing it in a way that would make sense to the average reader. But I know I succeeded at that because some version of this book has existed now for 29 years. And people get it. I watch people get this. This is not hard to get. And the reason they get it is it's natural law. It's like the Pythagorean theorem. When you first look at the Pythagorean theorem, when you're maybe 13, you say, I get it. This makes sense. And you've got it. Or the periodic table of elements, same thing. You look at it when you're a young student, you say, I see. This makes sense. Hydrogen is number 1, helium is 2, lithium is 3. Everything goes horizontally and vertically. So now, when Dmitry Mendeleev created it, I think he had 79 elements. Now we have something like 125. So because it works, people have been just adding the elements. They fit because it's a workable paradigm. So several people have said to me, what book is your book like? And I have to tell them in all candor, I don't think there's ever been a book like this before, at least on Earth. Maybe on another planet and we don't know about it. But on Earth, I don't think there's ever been a book like this. But each of these 35 scales is expressed in what you could call a table or a spreadsheet. And that table is similar to the periodic table of elements. When instead of it being for matter, it's for the corresponding subjects that are covered in the book, in the 35 scales. So you have 35 periodic tables for these subjects. And if I may, I'd like to tell you now the names of the scales so you'll know exactly what subjects I'm talking about. May I do that?
Definitely, I
Okay.
am very curious to know them. But
Okay.
before we delve into each of the skills, I was just wondering and would like to take a moment to appreciate the robustness of your body of work. I'm a very big believer in science, right? And empiricism actually makes things really simple for the human mind to understand and, of course, to follow. So, mathematics and the pure sciences heavily rely on the empirical method, right? So,
Absolutely.
what has been the methodology behind the discovery of the skills before we now delve into the nomenclature of each of these skills?
Well, all I want to tell you is the name of the scales so that you'll know what subject matter we're talking about. And you'll
Okay,
see that it covers human phenomena. Okay? So these are the
okay.
individual scales: the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are
Hmm.
the scales, the group scales, the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Any one of these scales can dramatically improve the life of the reader. And let me just tell you, as an example, how that would work. You could ask yourself, on the subject of motivation, what's my mother's motivation toward me? What's my father's motivation toward me? What's my brother's motivation toward me? What's my boss's motivation toward me? Every time you spot it correctly, you'll have an insight. So now I see why he does this. He has this motivation. So you could do this with everyone you know and everyone you have ever known. So using this one little question, you could get 2, 3, 4, 500 different applications. And then you could reverse the vector and say, what is my motivation toward my next door neighbor? What is my motivation toward my teacher? What is my motivation toward my brother, etc.? And do it again for another 3 or 400 people. Now, every time you do it, you'll have an insight. That was my motivation toward Mary. No wonder we couldn't get along. See? So by the time you finish this, you have had 500, 600, 700 motivation insights. So your mind is much clearer because on the subject of motivation, you know the motivation of everyone toward you and the motivation of you toward everyone. Now that's one scale of 35. So this is a very big subject. So that's the general idea, how this came about, what it is, and why it works.
This seems to be quite a deep and profound body of work. Personally, I do have a first degree in economics, and that is in the Faculty of Social Sciences. And of course, I did quite a number of courses in philosophy, and of course in psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science, demography, and social statistics, and I see the themes within these skills having synergy with every aspect of the social sciences. And of course, reviewing your own background, you have a background that spans, across psychology, philosophy, the pure sciences, mathematics, law, and more, just to mention a few. So, how have these disciplines influenced the development of septimics?
Well, let me say this. There's always a question when a discovery is made, how come this guy discovered it and nobody discovered it before? You could say that about Newton's three laws of motion, right? Why did Newton discover the three laws of motion? And nobody prior to him for thousands of years figured it out. Or why did Einstein figure out E equals mc squared? I think the reason why I was able to discover this, in addition to the nature of my work, which I told you about already, and seeing it reified in the sessions, is my polymathic mindset. I was able to see this for what it is. I was able to see this big thing. There are very few polymaths because our whole education system militates against it. For those of you who don't know, examples of polymaths are Thomas Jefferson and Erasmus. So my polymathic frame of mind enabled me to see the meaning in this, to see what it was. If I had only studied one or two fields, I don't think I would have been able to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have seen it. It would have been too big for me to see because I was looking at the tree rather than the forest. But since I'm a forest man, I see forests, and I saw this forest. And I said, yeah, this could really help people, and it does.
In order to be a polymath, your brain needs to function at some higher dimension, and that requires a very high IQ. Do you mind? Have you ever had an IQ test, and do you mind sharing what your score was?
Well, first of all, I have had IQ tests, although I haven't had one recently, so it's probably not the same as it used to be. But I would rather not give a number because
I'll give us a range then.
it's a little uncongenial, to throw that around. But I will say, many people, when they hear that I've won scholarships and degrees and all of this, and I had high SAT scores, they say, gee, you must be very smart. And I sort of correct them. I say, I don't think that's why. I think it's because I was a very conscientious student, because I loved school. I started school when I was 3, and I have been engaged in education my entire life to this very day. I love learning anything if it's a legitimate subject. So I can still remember the exact moment when I first discovered that some children didn't like school. I was shocked. I'm standing at the chalkboard with another boy, and we're doing division. And he said something that I didn't understand. I said, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You mean you don't like school? He said, no, I hate school. I was absolutely shocked. I never heard such a thing. And then the light bulb went on over my head. Now I'm starting to understand the behavior of some of these students, why they act the way they do. They don't love school the way I do. I just continued to love school and kept and even after I stopped formal education, I kept studying and studying and studying, because the main thing that I learned from my education was how to study, or you might say how to learn. And so it's very easy for me to pick up a subject, take one college course on it, get an A, and then study it for the rest of my life and master it completely. And I've done that many times. So it's really about being conscientious. And as far as being a student, being compliant. In other words, I did as I was told. If the algebra teacher said, I want you to go home and do all the problems on page 17, I did it. I didn't get down to number 10 and say, oh, it's time for Star Trek. I'm turning this off. I'm going to go watch my TV. That never happened. Even when I was sick, I would keep it a secret so that I could still go to school, and having people not stop me from going to school because I was sick. So my enthusiasm for learning and my conscientiousness, I think, is more significant than anything else, because there are a lot of smart people who don't do well in school, don't like school,
Very, very correct.
Yeah, I have an enthusiasm for learning, and it rubs off on my students. I'm a very good tutor. I've had a lot of tutoring experience, and the enthusiasm that I have for algebra or music or whatever it is, or literature, it comes across, and it makes a difference. Because when you have a teacher who's enthused about what he's teaching, you feel it. It comes across. You get it, and that's part of the enjoyment for me. Of, Because my students are always saying, I'll tell them something, I'll go, oh, yeah, now I see what you mean. That's an insight, see? That's a spiritual thing. And that's what I do for my students. And that's what I did for my clients for 40 years. Guy comes into me and says, Jim, I can't get along with my wife. I don't know what to do. Will you work with me? I say, sure. So we get in the session, right? Now we're talking about his wife. 20 minutes into it, says, wait a minute. I just realized she's just like my mother. No wonder we can't get along. See, now when he came into that session, he did not know that. What happened? He had an insight. So he got a little bit smarter, and as a result of that insight, he was able to figure this out. So for me, that's what it's about. It's about bringing the person to insight. And that's what the word education means. It comes from the Latin word educare, which means to draw out. So simply giving a person some data, that's not really education. You have to connect with the being. You discuss the Zauberberg by Thomas Mann. He says, oh, now I see what this is about. See, that's a spiritual experience. It's just like when he becomes a born-again Christian. See, it's like, now I see this. But it's for all subjects. Like when I'm in calculus and he shows me how to find a derivative. Oh, I see. This is beautiful. I've got it. This is for the rest of my life. I know how to find a derivative. See? And that's what I did with my clients and what I'm still doing with my students.
Just to draw on what you said about being a born again Christian, it just made me remember a portion of the scripture. If a man be in Christ, behold, all things have passed away, all things have become new. So the psychology of motivation has actually struck me with the narrative that you have actually expatiated on. You talked about some smart people who do not like school, and yourself, being a highly scholarly individual.
Yes.
For me personally, I grew up in Africa. I grew up in Nigeria. I'm Nigerian, proudly Nigerian. And in our culture in Nigeria, you're forced to go to school, right? They sort of see education as a social insurance policy, more like you have to be educated so that you will not be poor, so that you won't, be a less privileged member of the society, right? So the emphasis, the motivation behind education was not really because, you want the kids to learn for the sake of learning, but to learn for the sake of future earning, so to speak.
Right.
And that led a lot of us, to get to study fields that we probably weren't, really enthusiastic about or interested in. The would I say psychology of the average African parent, when I was growing up, which they belonged to the Generation X and the Generation X and baby boomers basically, because I am a millennial. So they would typically want you to study one of the so-called lucrative courses, lucrative fields, like be a lawyer, be a doctor,
Right.
be a chartered accountant like myself, or be a banker, right? And for me, I did start learning very early in life because my parents did not let us watch TV, but my dad had this very massive library, and I had started, reading books on psychology, philosophy, studying the works of the likes of Immanuel Kant, Socrates, Plato, even the likes of contemporary philosophers like Bertrand Russell, who won the Nobel Prize for literature at some point. And one thing about learning is I discovered the more you get to know, the more you get to discover that you do not know.
Exactly.
And it takes you into this rabbit hole this never ending hole
Yes,
of constantly wanting to know and
that's
know
right.
and know. But coming from a place like Africa, at some point in life, especially when you start becoming an adult and, taking on more responsibilities in life, the motivation would be more towards learning something that can, earn you a living.
Hmm.
And that commercialization, you would agree with me, is a very big enemy of humanity and pure art, because commercialization kills, creativity and genuineness, right?
Yes.
So you grew up in America, I suppose,
Hmm.
and the social structure is different over there.
Hmm.
You were a very smart, kid growing up, and you probably did not face the similar kind of, would I say, hardships or challenges that the kids in Africa face.
Uh-huh.
So, talking about the motivation behind, do you think that sometimes some of the smart individuals are derailed or affected by environmental factors that, persons like yourself probably were not subject to, and that affects a person's pattern
Of course.
of growth and development?
Sure. Yeah, I had plenty of hardship in my life. Let me tell you, being a serious student is not an easy thing to do. When I was in college, I was taking the maximum load, 18 credits, and then on evenings and weekends, I would study other courses off campus. So that's stressful. And I have to tell you, while other people were playing video games, watching TV, going to movies, bowling, playing tennis, playing golf, I was studying or meditating. 'Cause I've been meditating for 40 years. And I think that's the whole story right there. I mean, those things I just mentioned to you, those pastimes, I've never done any of those things. I don't know anything at all about video games. I haven't been to a movie since 1989. I'm a serious scholar. So I was, when I was growing up, I was happiest in a library because we didn't have any computers then. You went to the library and you had to research everything, look it up in the card catalog. But I felt that the people I wanted to be around were surrounding me, like Plato and
Socrates,
yeah,
Aristotle.
Socrates and Shakespeare and Saint Augustine. They're all there on the shelf, and I could access their minds, which was what was important to me because for me, knowledge is intrinsically valuable. Now, I realize that's not true for most people. Most people are not motivated to gain knowledge as the end, it's more a means, as you suggested.
Hmm.
But was so enthused about learning so many things that I didn't realize I was a polymath until fairly recently. And I said, I know all this stuff. I guess I'm a polymath. And I was sitting in my friend's living room a few years ago, and we were just talking. And he stopped and he said to me, "You know a lot of stuff." And that made me think, oh yeah, I guess I do. So first I thought of myself as a polymathic scholar, which is true, but then I realized at this point in my life, it's more truthful to say I'm a polymathic intellectual than a polymathic scholar. I certainly was a polymathic scholar earlier in my life. But anyway, I think I addressed your point.
Okay, I guess yourself and myself, we probably share a few things in common. I consider myself a well-rounded intellectual, not considered using that terminology polymath. And I have been in many situations in which I would probably like to have an intellectual conversation with, individuals on, would I say, pretty much random topics, and get dismissed as like, why do you know too many things? But for yourself, how did that affect you, you know would I say, growing up, and of course, in your adult life, not having adequate people to engage in intellectual conversations.
Right.
I know that must have happened to you.
Yes, I have a couple of things I can tell you about that. First of all, I realized by the time I was about 14 that I had to have separate groups of friends. So I had one group of friends with whom I would attend plays and poetry readings, another group of friends with whom I would attend science and math lectures, another group of friends with whom I would play sports, another group of friends with whom I would play music. And none of these people could stand one another. You know, when I was in prep school, I had one close friend who was a whiz, and anything to do with math or science, he'd get like 99. But everything else, he struggled. I'd have to help him. And then I had another friend in that same school who was the exact opposite. He struggled with math and science, and he did great in anything having to do with literature and the humanities. Well, they were both friends of mine, but I had to keep them separate because they didn't like one another. They had nothing to discuss. So that was one solution that I had. I had separate sets of friends. The main problem I had was finding enough time for all of it. Because when you have all these different groups, it's time consuming. So, I would, for example, I was on the football team. So I was the only guy in the math club who was on the football team. So this was an anomaly. Now, all these guys in the math club were skinny guys with glasses. I didn't have glasses.
Nerds.
I had all these muscles, from being a football player. So they sort of looked at me like, what is this guy doing in here? Who let him in? This must be a mistake. Are you sure you're in the right room? But I loved math, and I got along great with the moderator because he could see that I was a mathematician. So, those guys, other than the math club, we had nothing in common. And then I would hang out with the guys on the football team, and they were my friends, but they didn't want to talk about calculus. They wanted to talk about football or baseball or something. And that's how my whole life was. Another thing that's significant is that I learned pretty early to keep my mouth shut. In other words, to not let people know how much I knew, because people don't like it. When I was a little
Very
kid,
true.
when I was a little kid, I did not know that. When you're 5, 6 years old, you don't think about that. You just say what you. And even when I was a small child, I was the smartest person in the room. They didn't like that. Get rid of this kid. Get this kid out of here. And I was always the irritating kid who asked questions that nobody could answer. I always want to know, how does a radiator work? How does a refrigerator work? How does the car work? How does the ceiling fan work? How does the washing machine? That's like when I was 5, you know? And so I would get books and study these things. Oh, washing machine, oh, that's how it works. So that they couldn't answer these questions. I remember when I was 3, I was listening to a record. This was even before CDs. We had records, right? Plastic records. I'm listening to it, and I went into the kitchen, and I said to my mom, "Mom, how do they get the man's voice into the record?" She said, "I don't know." But I wanted, well, eventually I learned, recording technology. So there's a lot to know about that. It's physics, audio, electronics, and everything. And so that's just who I was. But I learned by the time I was a teenager not to do that anymore. I would learn just to shut up and focus on the other person and try to make the conversation congenial for the other person. And so even though I knew what was going on, I would not say it. Like a friend of mine, when I was a kid, he talked about a centrifugal force. There is no centrifugal force. It's a centripetal force. The centrifugal force is an illusion. It's actually a centripetal force. But I wasn't going to tell him that. He wanted to make his point. Okay, fine. So I've sort of learned to just keep it to myself. I'll tell you a story. When I was 18, I was in engineering school. I was a math whiz. And a friend of mine who I knew who was a musician friend, we played music together. He said, I have a friend in the college that I'm going to who needs some help with algebra. Would you tutor her? I said, sure. So he gives me the name. I went down, I met this girl. So she's a freshman in college, and I'm tutoring her in algebra. This was not hard for me. Okay. This was very easy. So, I would go for an hour at a time, and I came back one day and she said, I don't understand. So I said, all right, let me explain this. So I explained it to her. And she looked at me like this and said to me, gee, you're really smart. I said, okay, let's get back to the math. But the significance of it is this girl was beautiful. And I was sort of hoping that I could date her. Now, I was being professional because she hired me to be a tutor, even though we were the same age. But as soon as she said that, I could see it was never going to happen. She saw me as some alien being, like Mr. Spock or something, And so I could see it wasn't going to happen because the way she viewed me, we couldn't really be a couple. So, that was like an early lesson for me because I could just tell right away. So I've actually had, but I tell this to people, they don't believe me, but I'm telling you it's the truth. I've had a lot of women who I wanted to date who just told me, I'm not going out with you. You're too smart for me. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I like being around smart people, but they just wouldn't, they just said, no, you're too smart. I'm not going out with you. And it's not like I was flaunting it. I was just being my regular self, and talking to them the way I'm talking to you. But, I guess they felt intimidated by it somehow. And so that was it. That was done, so I've sort of learned to try to keep it quiet. And a lot of people who I know me in one field and don't know anything about my other fields. Like, I've been teaching music since I was 14. I was a very good musician. And I still am teaching music. A lot of those people don't know that I went to engineering school. They don't know that I scored in the top 1% in the nation in the chemistry essay. They're not interested. They don't want to hear it. I don't bring it up, So I just deal with people on whatever format they want me to deal with them and don't go into any of this other stuff. Once in a while, I bump into somebody like you who's inquisitive and I'm answering your questions.
So, do not feel bad. I can very much relate to the challenges that
Right.
that you've been through, even with the ladies as well. So I can very much understand
But
that.
I'll tell you a good thing,
It's
the teachers loved me. The teachers,
definitely.
I was like I was always on time. I always did all my assignments. I asked penetrating questions, etc. So a lot of my friends were the teachers. I didn't want to hang out with the students. I hung out with the teachers. The teachers would go out for me for a beer or something, because they really related to me. I talked about the math club. So our moderator was a math whiz, and he could see that I was really a mathematician. He gave me a copy of Newton's Principia, the most famous math book ever written, just because he liked me. I was 17. I read it. Wow, this is beautiful, And he took me to a university to use the computer, just the two of us, because it's part of math, So that was a good thing. The relationships with the teachers was a very good thing, and so that was kind of made up for the fact that to me a lot of the students were dopey, you know.
I
Uh,
have been a teacher as well, and I
so
understand and appreciate very bright students. And of course, you're a teacher as well, and you can attest to this. to this fact that when a student is bright uh, and they ask probing questions that challenge the intellectual faculty of the teacher. The teacher
Yes,
appreciates that because it's communication is meant to be a two-way street. So the teacher is meant to
that's right.
instill knowledge, but of course, having those quality, sound-minded students helps to elevate the level of the teacher. Because I tell people it's one level to understand a concept, especially complex concepts, right? It's another level of understanding to be able to teach it.
That's right.
And if you have bright students, it makes your work easy. But if you have highly sound students, they challenge, the methodology behind
Yeah.
your tutoring. And of course, it just helps, take you to the next level as a teacher. I'm very sure you agree with that 100%.
Oh, sure.
But coming back to your career, you conducted over 350 interviews. And, what is the common reaction people have when they first learn about Septimics?
Well, at first blush, they're a little like impressed. Whoa, this is big. But when they actually read the book and get into it, it's like, wow, is the reaction. It's like a big reaction. And, I have people who are becoming septimicists who are effusively appreciative that I created this thing because it's a life changing book. I mean, once you study this book, you can never be the same
Hmm.
because it opens your eyes to things that you did not know were there. There's this whole other thing here. I didn't think about that.
The more you look, the less you see.
Well, anyway, it's a big reaction, And nobody is lukewarm about the subject. You have people who are just not going to pay attention to it because they're not interested. They don't want to learn. They're not motivated. They don't want to read a book. Okay, they have nothing to do. But the people who do, they are blown away by this. So that's the common reaction that I've been getting.
Hmm.
Right from 1995, when I sent the first version of it out, they were blown away by this. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about why they get blown away. Can I do that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I wrote this book to help people. I've had a lifetime of helping people, primarily in some sort of a teacher, coach, facilitator role. Each of these 35 skills provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, or activity moves persons up the scale, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. So I'm giving you a yardstick by which to measure human affairs, which is an entirely new thing. More importantly, just finding out what level you or another person is at on any scale is by itself inherently enlightening and beneficial because you have a realization. Every time you find a correct level, you have a realization, and that's how you know you found the right level. So if I'm working with somebody who says, when I realized I was at level 5, that explained X, Y, and Z. I know he found the right level because he had an epiphany. See, that doesn't happen. You didn't find the right level. You missed. And that happens sometimes because people don't understand themselves or don't understand the other person or don't understand the book. Because I'll tell you something that I know from a lifetime in education and tutoring lots of people. Most people do not know that they do not know the meaning of a word. So I never say to a student, "Do you know what this word means?" I never say that. Because if I do, they're going to say, "Yeah, I know what it means." What I do is I say, "What is the definition of electron? What is the definition of quotidian?" Whatever it is. And if I do not get a correct answer in 1 second, I say, "Let's look it up." We look it up. Always, 100% of the time, the guy learns something. He says, Oh, well, I knew this definition, but I didn't know this one and this one. Or, oh, I didn't know this derivation, you know? And so the guy has, then we go back to the text. Now read it and see if it makes sense. Ah, now it makes sense to me. See, if I didn't guide him into that, he would have just stumbled over it. That's what happens to most students. You have to be inquisitive. And I'll tell you, I carried with me for 15 years an unabridged dictionary everywhere I went. And I traveled a lot because if a word came up, didn't matter where I was, day or night, I looked it up. Yeah, I see what that means. Okay, now because English is not an easy language. A lot of people
Definitely
think
not.
it's easier than it actually is because they don't know it. For example, there's a scale of literacy. Most people think, well, you're either illiterate or you're illiterate. No, there are 7 levels of literacy. Illiterate is what I call level 7 on that scale. Literate is level 4. There are 2 levels in between, and then there are 3 levels above literate. And when you start observing people this way, it makes sense. Like William F. Buckley, he was a
So,
hyper literate.
sorry to interrupt you. I'm curious to know what the 7 levels are.
Let me see if I can remember them. If not, I'll have to look up the book. The lowest level is illiterate, can't read. All right. It's like me with Chinese. I don't know any Chinese or Swahili, nothing. Okay, I'm illiterate. Above that is subliterate. This person can sign a check, can maybe read some simple instruction. He can take a driver's test, at the DMV. That's about it. Subliterate. He can just barely get by in society. Above that is semi-literate. Now, there are millions of people who are semi-literate who have no clue about it. In fact, I can tell you, there are millions of people with graduate degrees who are semi-literate. Don't know it,
Very true.
especially in the STEM subjects. I have a friend who's a doctor, highly successful surgeon, highly regarded, okay? A very successful person, has a PhD, of course. And so just because we were friends, I had read this novel, which I liked very much. When I finished it, I saw her and I said, oh, I read this novel here. Read it, it's good. She said, okay. So the next time I saw her was like a week or 2 later, and she hands me back the book. And she said to me, and I quote, I can't read this book. This is a doctor. That was like, I was surprised. How could somebody with a doctorate not be able to read a novel that millions of people have read? This was a popular novel. So that's a perfect example. And, as I've gone through life, I realized, yeah, just because somebody has a graduate degree does not mean he's literate. On the other hand, you have somebody like Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln had at most 12 months of school in his entire life. But if you read his speeches, wow, was he literate? The Gettysburg Address, the second inaugural address, they're some of the greatest speeches ever written. And we know he wrote them himself because we have them in his handwriting. He just sit down with a pencil and a piece of paper and wrote it out. And he crossed out words, just like the way Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, same thing. He wrote it out in ink, and he would cross out words and put in other ones, We know that's his handwriting. So he was a very literate person, Abraham Lincoln. Brilliant person. And we know from his speeches, but also from the description of him by the hundreds of people who knew him. You know how many books have been written about Abe Lincoln? Probably thousands. We know all about him. So, you could be very literate without much education. And you can be not very literate with a lot of education. And a lot of it depends on what subject you study. I mean, if you're an English major, you're not going to graduate if you are not literate. because you're going to read a lot of stuff and you're going to have to explain it on tests, as opposed to like engineers. I mean, I went to
The
engineering
STEM
school.
subjects.
Yeah. I was, and a lot of these guys in engineering school, I could tell just hanging out with them. I mean, we were very friendly. We were like, a whole bunch of guys all together studying. I could see they were not literate. They didn't know the difference between a gerund and a participle. So a lot of engineers are like that. A lot of math majors are like that. So above literate is very literate, then hyperliterate, and then transliterate.
Wow.
Transliterate is a person who has telepathic abilities. He doesn't need reading or writing. He can just look in your mind and see what you're thinking. And there are people who have bits and pieces of that. But, hyperliterate would be somebody, maybe William F. Buckley was hyperliterate. I mean, he wrote just hundreds and hundreds of articles and books, and I read a lot of it. Wow, the
That's
quality
wordsmith.
of his writing. Whether or not you agree with him is another thing, you know, but the quality of his writing was so good. And listening to him speak, listening to him speak is like listening to Pavarotti sing. So he may have been a hyperliterate. I mean, I never met him, so I would only be guessing. But there are, people in high office who are very literate, but there are also people in high office who are just literate. I'm not giving any levels, but you can see this. And if you read the book, it's really clear because I tell you exactly how they manifest. If you have a guy who reads books for fun, he's a literate person. He might even be very literate, but you probably know most people don't read much anymore since the internet has taken over, which is a very sad thing. I was really a bibliophile. I love to read. In fact, I loved to read so much that at times it was a problem for me because I'd start reading something really good and I would just keep reading and reading and reading. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. How am I get up for work? And there was a period in my life when I made a rule, no books allowed in my house because I had a real problem. I would just get carried away with reading, not even realize how much time went by. Like a really good book, you get into it and it's like you're in another world. If you are very literate and you read good literature, you're going into another universe. Like when I read Dune, I
You just
was
get
in that
stuck in that
world.
rabbit hole.
Yeah. So, again, I had to control it. But after a while, after I had no books in my apartment for a while, I sort of got it under control and I could, but, I could read pretty fast. And so for me, I don't really parse things as good or bad. It's like either I know about it or I don't know about it. Like, I don't know if you know about Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of
The
Latter-day
the
Saints.
religion.
Yeah, when you're 18, you go on a mission. All the men have to go on a mission. The two guys live together and they go around house to house to try to evangelize. So I'm in my house, and these two, I could see right away they were Mormons because I knew exactly what they looked like. And they come up to me. They gave me a copy of the Book of Mormon. Okay, so I read it. Now, it didn't make me a Mormon, although I am sympathetic toward them. But most people would say, I don't want to read that. It's like, I read, like Mein Kampf. Hitler was the worst person who ever lived. I still read the book. But to tell you the truth, I didn't finish it because it was pretty hard to take. One of the few books I didn't.
Your woman story actually reminds me of the Jehovah's Witnesses. While I was growing up, they used to share the literature, and I just used to read it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll read anything. I don't get into good, bad, right, wrong. I don't parse things that way. I'm interested in, do I know it or do I not know it? So, if something interesting, I read it and now I know it. Like For example, Albert Speer was one of the high-ranking Nazis. He was very close to Hitler. He was one of the Nazis tried in Nuremberg. They tried 29. And despite his high position, they did not give him the death penalty. He was the only one of them who said, I'm sorry, I regret what I did. We did a lot of things we shouldn't have done. So they gave him 20 years. And while he was in prison, he wrote a book called Inside the Third Reich. This is a bright man. He was an architect, very smart man. So I read that. Very interesting. I'm not a Nazi. I don't like Nazis. I don't agree with them. But still, he was a smart man. And Hitler knew that. And they had a very special relationship because Hitler admired. He was the architect for the Third Reich. And I don't know how much you know about that, but that was like they were going to build all these things and this guy was going to design all of them. In fact, he did design them and just they never got to it because we bombed the hell out of them. But anyway, so I'll read, I read Marx, didn't make me a communist. I read Ayn Rand,
Oh,
it didn't
Max.
make me an objectivist. No. I want to know. I want to know what it's about. And that's how I am with everything. So, sometimes I bump into somebody who knows something I don't know. I'm thrilled. Like, I bumped into some guys in the bar. They were professional scuba divers. I'm a certified scuba diver, but these guys were professionals. I don't know if you know this. That's one of the riskiest jobs on earth.
I'd never try that. It's not for Africans.
They would work on oil rigs, very dangerous. They would collect sea creatures like sharks into a tank, into a cage. Imagine going after a shark or some other creature to capture it and bring it to captivity. I mean, and I was thrilled to talk to these guys. And I learned a lot of things I didn't know that I didn't learn when I studied scuba diving. Like they said, if a shark comes after you, just hit it in the nose with the butt of your knife. It'll go away. Because sharks are not predators. They're scavengers, which means they're fundamentally timid.
Mm.
So if they all carried a knife, you hit them with the butt of the knife, the shark goes away. I mean, most people would be swimming for their lives. Lots of luck with that because the shark is going to win in that race. But, I'm happy to talk to people who know more than I do in almost anything. So I've had a lot of interesting friends and a lot of interesting conversations about all kinds of things. I mean, I had a friend who was a champion rugby player. That's kind of an obscure thing. A professional rugby player. I mean, how many professional rugby players are there? And he taught me some very interesting things that I never would have thought of. But that's how I am. I'm interested in all kinds of things because I want to know.
Have you ever read the scripture from the Grill movement?
The what?
The scripture from the Grill movement. It's a religion.
No, I don't know about that.
Yeah, they call it the Grill message and the light of truth.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they have quite some interesting literature in that religion.
Uh-huh.
It's something I'd recommend you give a read.
Okay.
But in terms of understanding septemics,
Yes.
how would you break it down to a 5-year-old in the simplest way possible for people that are new to the concept?
I would never attempt to explicate Septimics to a 5-year-old. That would be a fool's errand. I also
Okay,
wouldn't. I
to
also
a
wouldn't.
dummy adult.
I also wouldn't try to teach them algebra or physics or how to read poetry in Latin. There's a lot of things I wouldn't do with a 5-year-old. You want to teach him to wash his hands before he comes to the table, and not throw food on the wall. That's pretty much the level they're at. And do your homework. Okay, that's what they have to learn. But as far as explaining it in a simple way to the average person, I would say this. First of all, I want to finish what I started saying before because I didn't finish. Once you know the actual level of a person on any scale, you can improve that person by moving them up one level. This is monumentally important because I have solved the gradient problem that has bedeviled mankind for 6,000 years. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Most people have problems, dilemmas, situations, difficulties that they can't resolve. They don't know how to fix it. 99% of the time, it's because they don't know the gradient.
Mm.
Any good teacher, facilitator, therapist, coach will tell you that human development must be done on a gradient. So I've worked as a physical trainer. If a guy comes to me who's 100 pounds overweight and says, Jim, I can't handle this. Can you train me? I say, sure. I'm not going to give that guy a 100-pound barbell and say, lift this, or tell him to go run 5 miles. That's malpractice. I have to figure out the gradient. So I would talk to him, look at him, say, okay, this guy looks to me like he can curl 15 pounds. So I give him 15 pounds, say, curl this, show him how to do a curl. How many of these can you do, right? So if he says to me, oh, I could do about 12 of these, I say, good. I want to do 12, 3 sets on each arm every day. And at the end of the week, we'll talk again. And at the end of the week, I'd say to him, how did you do? If he says, this is pretty easy now, I'd say, okay, let's do 15 reps. See, that's going to be harder for him. So now he's doing 15. See, I'm finding the gradient. And that we just keep doing that. That's what I did with my clients for 40 years, finding the gradient. So you cannot make a couch potato into an Olympic athlete. It cannot be done. He's 8 or 10 levels below that. You can make him into a normal person, and then maybe you could make him into a part-time weekend athlete, like goes out and plays golf instead of sitting on the couch. That's an improvement for him. So it's all about the gradients. So these scales are the gradients. Those 35 subjects that I read off, each of those has 7 levels. Those are the gradients. If you're at level 5, you target yourself for level 4, and you will get there. You know why? It's the next level up. I'm telling you the gradients. Just like if you have a good algebra teacher, he knows, okay, first he has to tell you what a variable is. This is what a variable is. You got that? You know, okay, good. Now, this is what an equation is. It's the same on both sides. See, you got that? So he knows the gradients. And after 2 semesters, you know algebra. The lousy teachers don't know that. They don't know how to work with gradients. So they don't have success. When I work with one of my students, I call it student-centered tutoring or student-centered teaching. In other words, it's not about me. It's not even about the subject. It's about the student. So I give the student something, and I see how he does with it. I tell him a day, and when I watch him, seeing if he says, now I see what I was doing wrong. Good. Okay, he's got that. We go to the next thing. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I say, well, I didn't really get it. So I explain it again another way. See? So student-centered. And I'm helping them with the gradient. So that is what these 35 scales are. I'm giving you the 7 levels. I figured out through a lifetime of work what the 7 levels are. Because I can guarantee you, somebody as smart as you, you'll look at this and you'll say, oh, I get this. Yeah, those are the 7 levels. And once you know them, you have a way to parse it. Like that doctor friend of mine. See, when I figured out, she's semi-literate. She's at level 5 on the scale of literacy. See, that would not be obvious. Most people say, well, she must be literate. She's a doctor. No, she was semi-literate. And that told me something about how to deal with that person. So just to continue the analogy, I have all kinds of people that work for me, right? I have a housekeeper, auto mechanic, gardener, right? So what I want to know is this mechanic, can he fix the car? I have a brilliant auto mechanic. He works on racing cars, which is the holy grail of auto mechanics. This guy knows everything. I have absolute confidence. Any problem with my car, I make one phone call, get the car over there. He says, okay, come back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Pay him whenever he wants, it's done. This guy's like a genius with automobiles. Now, on the scale of human ability, he is at least an expert, right? That's level 3 on that scale. Now, where he is on the scale of literacy, probably not too high. This is a guy, I've known him for like 5 years. I've never seen him in a shirt that had buttons on it. Never. He probably doesn't even own a shirt that has buttons on it. He always wears a t-shirt. That's okay. What do I care? It's his shirt. I don't have to dress like that. So, he probably is not scholarly, he's probably not literate. He might not be high in somebody, but when it comes to cars, he knows it all. I have no problem. And on top of that, he's honest. Sometimes I say, check this out. See, he says, there's nothing wrong with that. See, some crooked guys would have said, oh, yeah, I found it wrong. I fixed it. He doesn't do that. He said, no, there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not charging you. I didn't do anything. So it's like, perfect. Or the guy who cleans my house, right? He's not a college educated person. He's a very nice person and he does a terrific job. So I make a list for him. Here's what I want done. He gets done. Pay him his price. And I'm not going to use words like quotidian or antediluvian when I speak to him. He won't know what I'm talking about. Now, if I'm talking to you, I can use those words and you're probably going to know what they mean. If I'm talking to him, I'm not going to say colossal. I'm going to say big. He knows what I'm talking. So you see, recognizing the levels of literacy, I don't know if he's semi-literate or subliterate. He's probably semi-literate because he's a pretty smart guy, even though he's not educated. So there's a certain way to treat that person. So that goes for all the scales. Now, let me give you an analogy that really explains this. I'm into gardening. Okay, I've been gardening since I was a boy. So you might say, Jim, come over to my house and look at my garden. Great. So I show up at Dem's house and I see, Dem has hydrangeas, forget-me-nots, irises, tulips, roses, bougainvillea. See, I can name these because I know all about flowers. Now, if you bring a 5-year-old kid into that yard, he's going to smell and see exactly what I did. But all he's going to say is, these are pretty and they smell nice. That's all he knows. Now, most adults are like that little kid as regards people. They don't know what they're looking at. They just don't know because they don't have this data. So when people get this data, they just eat it up. And it changes the way they function. So I'll tell you a story. About 6 months ago, I'm a single guy. I met this beautiful blonde, gorgeous, looked like a movie star, glamorous, congenial, well-dressed, beautiful woman, right? And she was interested in me. So now we're going through the usual getting to know you stuff, right?
Talking state.
Right. Like, what do you do on the weekends? What kind of music do you listen to? It's like 100 things you could discuss, right? So we had about at least 6 conversations like that. So I noticed in one conversation that she was low on a certain scale. So I just noted it. So then we had another conversation and I realized she's low on this other scale. Then we had another conversation that said, she's low on this other scale. Now it's starting to dawn on me. This is a downscale person. There is such a thing as a downscale person. And I said, whoa, do I want to get involved in this? I dismissed her. I said, pass. No thanks. She was shocked. You know why she was shocked? She was so gorgeous. I was probably the first guy who ever did that to her. It's not like we had an argument or anything. Nothing. I could just see that she was at or near the bottom of many of these scales. And I know better than to mess with that. Okay? On the scale of basic purposes, Adolf Hitler was at level 7, the lowest level. Okay? That tells you a lot about him. Because I'll tell you, I'm a student of military science. And when I was studying World War II, and I would see some of the things that Hitler did, I didn't understand. Why would he do that? Like he had a non-aggression pact with the Russians, but he attacked them. That doesn't make any sense from a military science point of view. He put himself into a two-front war. That's crazy. His right-hand man, Hermann Goering, said, if the Russians get into the war, we will lose. And that's exactly what happened. But Hitler got them in. When I realized he was a destructive person, level 7 on the scale of basic purposes, his purpose was to destroy. Now I understood. He wasn't just destructive to the Allies, he was destructive to the Wehrmacht. He was destructive to Germany. He was destructive to his own family. So that's what you get from somebody like that. Crazy stuff. Now, if you had somebody like Hermann Goering was not as bad as Hitler. Yes, he was a Nazi. Yes, he was a racist. But he wasn't a Looney Tune. They could have won that war if Hermann Goering wasn't drunk. Or I mentioned this other guy, Albert Speer. Albert Speer, I've seen him on video. I've read his book. Smart man, not dopey. He had the leader of the nation making him his personal architect. Who's going to say no to that? Doesn't matter. I mean, there's all kinds of people. If a president asks them to work for them, doesn't matter whether they like them or not. They're going to say yes, because on its resume it says assistant to the president of the United States. And then after 4 years, they can get a job anywhere, right? That happens all the time in the United States, all the time. People, secretary of this, assistant director, and then, the biggest law firm in the world will hire them, for $1 million a year. And it goes on their letterhead, like Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was a lawyer. Okay. After he left the presidency, he went to a law firm. It said Richard Nixon on the letterhead. Whoa. See, right there, you're getting a lot of money from people. So, that's how these things work in general. Personally, I was always sort of into doing my own thing and trying to really make a difference and help people. So getting back to Septimics, I'm giving you the gradients. Here they are. They're in the book. Use them. So if you have trouble with reacting to people, there's a scale of reaction. Some people react a lot. Like if somebody says to me, I say, okay, why do you say that? What makes you say that? I appreciate you telling me. I'm not going to react to that because I'm high on the scale of reaction. But there's some people, you do that to them and you get punched in the nose. That's a reaction. Now look, when I was a kid, this material didn't exist, right? So I made the same stupid mistakes that everybody else makes. I got in fist fights when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was not a big thing to get in fist fights. It was like normal. That's not true anymore in the United States. But, I remember some guy, actually it was my cousin, said something about my mother. I was pounding him into the pavement, and his father came and rescued him, literally pulled me off him, okay? That would never happen today. If somebody could insult my mother, I'd say, okay, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm not going to react. That's how people get in trouble. Did you see that thing with Zelensky, with Trump in the White House? Right?
I have been restricting myself from asking you about Donald Trump, but you brought it yourself. And
Zelensky,
please
everybody
weigh
in the
him
world
on
said
your
it.
scale. Weigh Donald Trump on your scale.
I'm not giving any levels, but I'm saying
Where does he
he
stand?
reacted. He reacted. He did not conduct himself properly. You're in the White House with the president of the United States. It doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump, if it's Obama, doesn't matter. He's the president of the United States and he invited you You don't talk over him. That's crazy. Not only did he insult the president, he insulted the vice president too. Right? They had a whole luncheon planned after that. They were all going to have a nice state luncheon, Didn't happen. They kicked him out because of how he behaved. So he reacted. Now, I understand Zelensky's been through a lot. It's true. The Russians attacked him. The Russians broke their word. The Russians killed millions of people. I understand. He's upset. He's angry. But if you can't control yourself when you're talking to a person in authority, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. So when I was talking to an authority figure, whether it's a judge, a policeman, a teacher, I was respectful. It didn't matter if I agreed with them or not. That's how you're supposed to do with it. There are a lot of dopey policemen. I've had a lot of policemen stop me for no reason at all. And, I'm not going to tell them, why don't you go catch a crook, instead of bothering law-abiding citizens. I'm not going to say that. That's disrespectful. See, that's a reaction. I'm just going to say, okay, here's my license. You want me to walk the line? I'll walk the line. Thank you very much. You look at the scale of reaction, you find out where you are. I see why I got in trouble. I'm at level 4. That's not so great. And then you can move yourself up to level 3 because it's the next level up. But I'll tell you, if you're at level 4 and you try to get to 1 or 2, you will fail. It's too steep a gradient. It can't be done. If you're on the first floor and you want to go to the 5th floor, you have to go through the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. Whether you take the stairs or the elevator or the escalator, right? And that's how Septimics is. You cannot skip a level. Impossible. Just like the colors of the rainbow. They're always red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. There's no variation. Doesn't matter what rainbow you see. That's what if you can have red and turn up the frequency and then you get orange. Turn up the frequency and then you get yellow. Turn up the frequency and then you get green. There's no way to get to green without going through yellow. It's nature. That is what these scales are like. It's just that I brought my engineering mindset to human phenomena. And because I had this career as human development engineer, and because I was polymathic, I was able to figure this out and express it in a way that the average person could understand.
So for
Questions?
the average person, how do they use Septimics to analyze, predict, manage their human affairs in their everyday life?
Okay. The best way to use it is you find the scale that's relevant to the situation and you analyze it. For example, let's say you have a friend, your friend Joe, and he's having relationship problems, right? He's always complaining to you about his relationship. He doesn't know if he's going to get a divorce. Finally, you say, Joe, come here, let me show you this. You open up the book to the scale of relationships and you put it in front of his face. You know he can read English. He looks at it and he says, you mean there's a scale of relationships? I've heard of such a thing. You say, yes. Where are you on the scale? Guaranteed he's going to want to know that because he's having trouble with this, isn't he? So what's going to happen is in a matter of seconds, I'm talking about 20, 25 seconds, something like that, he's going to find a bracket. He's going to say something like, oh, I can see right away. We're definitely not at 1, 2, or 3 because it's the top of the scale. We're having a lot of trouble.
So we're close to 7.
So it's got to be 4, 5, 6, or 7. You say, great. Now, go ahead and read the text, and then you can get it exactly. So he reads it. You can help him as a tutor. See? And then he comes back, well, now that I read it, I can see our relationship is at level 5. That's not so good. That's near the bottom. No wonder we're having a lot of trouble. And he will have some real, that explains why, See? So he's a little bit smarter. And then you can say to him, you could move your relationship from 5 up to 4. He says, you can. You say, yeah, it tells you in the book how to do that. But before you do that, let me show you this. And you open the book to the scale of sexuality. Well, that's relevant, isn't it? So He looks at it and says, "You mean there's a scale of sexuality?" You say, "Yes." You don't have to tell me if you don't want, but for your own illumination, where are you on the scale? See, he's going to find a bracket. He's going to say, "Well, I can see right away 6 and 7 have nothing to do with me. So that's out." Okay, you got it down to 5. Go ahead and read it. You can get it. So he reads it. Says, "I'm at level 4. All right, that explains X, Y, and Z." And he might also say, "And my wife Gertrude is at level 5. No wonder we're having a lot of trouble. Those are conflicting levels." See? And that opens the way to do something about it. Because if he could bring her from 5 up to 4, then the relationship will be harmonious. So that's how you use it. It's just like you find, like you sit down at a table, right? You have 8 utensils. This one is for the shrimp cocktail. This one is for the dessert. This one is for the main course. If you have a butter knife, you have a steak knife, you have a tablespoon, right? And you have to know what utensil to use for what food. That's the same thing here. It's like, oh, all right. This guy keeps complaining to me that his wife is a control freak. Let's look at the scale of control, right? So he looks at it, says, "There's a scale of control? Yeah. You keep complaining to me about your wife. Where is she? She studies it. I can see she's at level 5. No wonder she's a control freak. That's what a person at level 5 is. So now he understands her better. So his relationship with her just improved a little bit. Then you could say to him, "Let's see where she is on the scale of equanimity." See? "Oh, yeah, she doesn't have a lot of equanimity. No wonder she flies off the handle and yells at me all the time. So she's at level 4. Let's see if we can move her up to 3, and then she won't lose her temper so easily. She'll have more equanimity." See? This is very practical, but you have to understand this is human affairs through the mind of an engineer. What
Mm.
do engineers do? Engineers solve real problems using known facts in the real world, right? So if you come to me and you say, "Jim, I have this stream on my property. Could you put a bridge over it?" I say, "Okay." And I throw my laser beam over it. It says it's 11.3 yards wide. And I start going through the whole process. How fast does it run? What kind of traffic, And I use all of my engineering skills to put up this bridge over your stream. So the bridge has to stand. Okay, I'm going to make calculations based on what you tell me. A car is going to drive. They are? Okay, now we need to calculate that. Okay, we need to put steel rebar in this concrete. See? So it's like very specific. So I just did that with human phenomena. And I found this thing that is apparently universally true. Now, I've been promoting this now for 4 years. People get it. They get it. Some guy, he doesn't know anything. He opens up the book to the scale of attack. Scale of attack, what the hell is that? I see. Scale of attack. Joe is at level 3. That explains why he's a pacifist. That's where a pacifist would be on level 3. But his father is a policeman. He's at level 2. See? So it's very specific. It's very user friendly. It's not hard to do. It's just like the flowers. I know all these flowers. Every tulip in the world is unique, and every rose in the world is unique. But I can always tell the difference between the two because I know what they are. And it's the same thing with Septimics. Every person is unique. This guy's way of reacting is different from this guy's way, but you can still use the scale of reaction to find where he is.
Mm.
And you find where he is, and then you can help him go up to the next level, and then he won't react so much. He won't get into fistfights in a bar. So that's what this is about.
I was wondering, as much as it is possible to elevate on the scales, is it also possible to decline
Yeah,
on the scales as well?
absolutely. That goes on all the time. What do you think you're seeing, right? You look in the newspaper. This guy murdered his wife. Well, look, there was a point when they went to the altar and they said, honor and cherish till death do us part, right? What happened? They went down the scales, right? We don't know the specificity of it, or you go into divorce court, right? And you find that there's this husband and this wife, they hate one another, right? They're making up lies about the other one. He gets drunk every week, guy maybe hasn't had a drink since Christmas. Why? Because they're in divorce court. Well, how did that happen? They went down the scale of allegiance. Every time a relationship deteriorates, it's always because allegiance deteriorates. They went down that scale. So this is what happens when a person crashes. So you have some guy, right, your friend. He makes $250,000. He drives a Corvette. He's got a beautiful mansion, his beautiful wife and 2 kids, right? And he's got $150,000 in the bank. Well, now what happens is his wife goes to take the 2 girls to the beach. They get in a car accident and they're all killed. The guy is crushed. He starts drinking. That's not unusual. Because he starts drinking, he becomes an alcoholic. Now he gets fired from his job. Why does he get fired? Because he's a drunk. Now he can't make his house payments because he lost his cushy job. And he can't get another good job because he's a drunk now. So he loses his house. Right? So you bump into this guy 5 years later. He's a homeless person living on the street, panhandling quarters to buy cheap wine. What happened to that guy? He crashed. He went down many scales. He didn't just go down one scale. He went down the scale of equanimity. He went down the scale of control. He went down the scale of physical fitness. He went down the scale of thought. Thought isn't as good. So yes, people go down the scales and up the scales. So what this tells you is when you find your level, if you succeed, it means you're going to go up to the next level. And if you fail, you will go down to the lower level, the one below it. You can only go to an adjacent level. That's one of the axioms of this subject. So you see this all the time. You see people go up, you see people go down.
You mentioned that Septimics is centuries ahead
Yes.
of the society
Yes.
into which it was introduced. But what makes it so revolutionary?
Well, first of all, there are several dimensions to that. One is, although anyone who can read English reasonably well and wants to improve himself or others can use this subject, most people will not. They're not. Their life is just not in that place. They have a job, they come home tired, they watch TV and they go to bed. And the next day they go back to work. This guy is, I could say, this book will change your life. We'll say, yeah. Not read it. Right? So maybe 500 years from now, we'll have a different society where everybody has money, everybody has a house, everybody has health care. Like in Star Trek, a future with no money. Who knows? Maybe that will happen. But right now, you have people who viscerally oppose things that are obviously good. Look what's going on in the United States. They're finding immense fraud, waste, and abuse in the federal government. Hundreds of billions of dollars that are being wasted and stolen. Okay? They're finding it. This is not a guess. They have the data. They have computer experts in there analyzing this. And it's all coming out, and they're starting to defund all this. There are people who are viscerally opposed of this. Elon Musk, who is leading this because of his genius, is getting death threats. Now, who would not want to remove waste, fraud, and abuse from the government? People have been saying for decades, let's get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse. It's a regular theme. Every guy says, when I get in there, I'm going to get rid of the waste fraud. We finally have somebody who's doing it. So there are millions of people who they're attacking his Tesla dealerships. They're cursing him out. This is a guy who was beloved a year ago. But now that he's in there digging up all this dirt and finding out all this criminality, I mean, they're arresting people and bringing charges, lawsuits and things against people who have stolen billions of dollars in scams. So you and I'm sure, both want to get rid of the fraud, the waste, and the abuse in any government, right? We're not talking
Definitely.
about stopping people from getting Social Security. No, that's not what we're not talking about taking money from the schools. No, that's not what we're talking about. Fraud, waste, and abuse. Crazy things, just stupid things. They're scams. They make up something and there's some kickback in it. It's a big scam. And they're stealing billions of dollars. Now, I've known for years this was going on, and I'm not alone in that. But how about all these people who are opposed to it? What sense does that make? Does that make any sense to you? Why be opposed to that? There are things you could be opposed. Somebody says, well, we can't afford all this money for Social Security. We're going to have to cut the benefits. I could see how some people would be opposed to that, especially the people getting the benefits. That's not what we're talking about. So think about Germany, right? You had all these Nazis, right? Trying to exterminate the Jews. That's crazy. Or slavery. The Confederacy fought a war to preserve slavery. That's degraded. Okay? So Earth is not a happy place, in case you haven't noticed. Look at what happened to the Israelis on October 7th a year ago, right? The Hamas went in there and they killed, what did they kill? 1,200 people? Innocent people. Women and children and civilians. I mean, so you think those people are going to read this book? Definitely not. They're not interested in improving themselves or others. Take somebody who's in organized crime, right? Organized crime has been around a long time and it will continue to be around for a long time. You have people who are professional criminals. They're not interested in improving themselves. If I said to one of these people, this book would help you improve yourself, he'd say, Tech, I don't want to hear about that. Is it going to help me, give me a scam where I can steal more money? No. Well, then I'm not interested. You see? So if you have some guy who's a drug addict and he steals things to pay for his drugs, he's not going to read this book. He can't read anything. He's high all the time. And even if he tried to read it, he wouldn't get it. It would be gobbledygook because he's a drug addict. So that's what I mean when I say it's way ahead of Earth, way ahead. Now, let me tell you exactly a perfect example of how this is true. The Copernican theory, also known as the heliocentric theory, right? That the Earth revolves around the sun. Right. So Copernicus, about 500 years ago, came out with this theory where he said, no, the sun does not go around the Earth goes around the sun. And so he propounded this theory, which of course is correct. Now, Galileo, one of the great geniuses of his day, accepted that. And the Catholic Church tried him for that, for heresy, and put him under house arrest for the rest of his life because he propounded the heliocentric theory, which is true. Now, most people think, well, okay, so 500 years ago, people didn't really know this. Now everybody accepts it. Every kid in school learns. But wait a minute. This doesn't go back 500 years. The heliocentric theory was first propounded by Aristarchus of Samos, a Greek, 300 BC. So from 300 BC until 500 years ago, that's 1,800 years it took for the actual truth about celestial mechanics to be accepted by people. People did not accept it from Aristarchus of Samos. They were not ready for it. So history is full of these things. You know the Romans had steam engines? They didn't figure out, wait a minute, we could attach this to a chariot. We don't even need horses. We could attach this to a catapult, and we could send a 2-ton rock and knock down a whole building if we use this thing. They didn't figure that out. But they had steam. We know they had steam engines. It's not a speculation. But they weren't ready to use it. Now, when James Watt came along in the 19th century, he figured out ways to use the steam engine and created the Industrial Revolution because they use it for everything then. We have this technology. You heat up the water, it makes steam. We put coal or even wood, it heats up the water, and then we have this force, and we can use it to do all this work for us. Steam shovels, right? We don't have steam shovels anymore because we've gone past that. We have hydraulic diggers now. But the steam shovel was a big thing when it came out. Like 100 years ago, they had steam. Wow, we don't need 200 guys to dig this cellar. One guy with a steam shovel can do it in 2 days. So it takes time. The Romans 2,000 years ago could have figured that out, but they didn't. So that's what I mean when I say this is way ahead of Earth. And I'll tell you, I'm not optimistic about this book proliferating in my lifetime. I don't think that will happen. I think you will read it. I think there are smart people who say, hey, this makes sense. I'm going to read this book. I have all these students now, all these septimicists, but still a very small group of people. Just like it took until Abraham Lincoln was elected for the United States to get rid of slavery. Now, Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote the Constitution, he tried to get that in there. And the Southerners said, absolutely not. No way. We had to fight a war to get that in there. South Carolina, as a response to Lincoln being elected, seceded from the Union. That was the proximate cause. And they fired on Fort Sumter, and that was the beginning of the Civil War. Obviously, the people in the South were not up to that yet. They were too vicious. They were too selfish. And we're talking mostly about the plantation owners, because 99% of the slaves belonged to about 25 plantations, rich guys who could afford them. So the people in the North were more enlightened. No, this is wrong. And so they fought a war, and 500,000 men died in that war, which in those days was a lot of people, to end it. So I'm sure there's still slavery going on today. It's in the papers
Definitely
every
modern
day.
day slavery.
Yeah, every day. They're finding these people, they'll find some truck and it's got like 200 girls in it. The cartels are selling slaves and making a fortune. There's cartels that are in Mexico. Well, the government recently declared them terrorist organizations. They're going after them with the military. Why didn't the last president do that? Well, the one before that. Okay. Why didn't Obama, who's half African American, you would think he would be sensitive to that. You think he just didn't know? I think he knew. You know why? I knew, and I'm not any bigwig. I just pay attention to things. There was a guy in the FBI, one of the top FBI guys. He was in charge of 3 different FBI offices in 3 different cities at different times. They murdered him. You know why? He
Why?
uncovered the slave trade, and it came out in public. It's on the internet. He said, I'm telling you, this is what's going on. There is a vast international slave trade of children. They killed him. They assassinated him with poison.
Hmm.
I think his name was Ted Gundy or Ted Gundry. But I listened to him speak, and a top-ranking FBI agent. You're going to spill the beans. They just killed him. They used some special radioactive toxin, put it in his food, he ate it, and he died. Okay? It's no big secret what happened with that. So, that's the world. So you and I are enlightened and are against all these things. But, there's a lot of crazy people out there. I mean, do you see what's going on in the United States with anti-Semitism? They're having riots.
It's wild.
It's crazy. I mean, the United States, from colonial times, welcomed the Jewish people. Do you know that the Jews in the United States are the
They're the richest
richest
population
people
subset,
in the United States? Yeah.
basically.
You know what that tells me? They pay more taxes than anybody else. So the United States very wisely took advantage of that. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, teachers, musicians, all these people who are Jewish are helping the United States be a better place. I mean, Einstein was a Jew, came to the United States. Okay? If the Nazis were smart, instead of trying to get rid of them, they would have taken advantage of them. They would have tried to do what the United States did, which is say, okay, we have these people, they're smart people, they're learned people, they're literate, okay? Let's take advantage of them. I mean, Nazi Germany in the 30s was full of Jewish doctors and lawyers and teachers, et cetera. And a lot of them were exterminated. So that's the world. And, it's not going to be easy to fix and it's not going to be quick to fix. But what I do know is that the people who do get this book and use it, their lives will be better. I've already seen it. They've already told me, that their lives are changed by this book. So the world is not really ready for this yet, but the smart people get it and they use it.
Hmm.
But think about this. Jesus came 2,000 years ago and taught us how to behave, right? If you read what he said, he was telling us how to be ethical, how to be nice people. How many people learned? Very few. I studied Christianity extensively, and I can tell you, even most Christians don't behave the way Jesus said to behave. Jesus said, if you have 2 shirts and you meet somebody who has no shirt, give him your shirt. Who does that? So there are a lot of people I call phony Christians. They're just, the type of people, they go to church on Easter and Christmas. That's it, And meanwhile, the guy's cheating on his wife, and he's cheating on the IRS, and all these things that a devout Christian would never do. So that's what I mean by that. The world is not ready for this yet. Someday it will be. I hope the book still exists at that time.
Definitely, it should still exist. And of course, you are clearly state that smart individuals would take advantage of this book
Yes.
about how can leaders, entrepreneurs, captains of industry use Septimics to improve decision making and achieve effectiveness and efficiency in leadership.
Okay. Remember, any problem, dilemma, situation, difficulty that has anything to do with people can be analyzed by one or more of these scales, usually more than one. So let's say you have the guy, he's the CEO of a corporation, right? Well, his right-hand man starts showing up late for work, right? He smells alcohol on his breath, right? He gets the book out. He says, Joe, come over here. What's going on? They have a talk. He shows him the book. And the guy starts straightening out his life. Well, the CEO benefits from that, doesn't he? Instead of having a guy who's not doing a good job. So let's say you own an automobile dealership, right? You make $10 million a year selling new cars. So you need a new salesman. So a guy comes in, right, and you're interviewing him now, right? And you're listening. And it comes out in the conversation that he is a money motivated person. Level 4 on the scale of motivation. That's what you want. He gets a commission for every car he sells. So you want somebody who's money motivated. Now, if a guy is dating a girl who's going out with him because he's rich, he might not want that. He might want somebody who actually loves him for himself. So he breaks up with her, but he keeps the guy who's selling the cars. You see, it's very specific. So this is, take somebody like, probably the most successful man in the world is Elon Musk. If he's not, I don't know who is, right? So I guarantee you, he would benefit from this book. Guarantee. He would read it, now I see how to deal with my wife. Now I see how to talk to Donald Trump. Now I see how to handle this guy who's running this department of SpaceX. See, he's having insights and is using it. Or he might even look at the scale of management, which gives you these 7 levels of management. I can't tell you how many people I help with that. Business owners. They look at this and I analyze their business. Do you have these 7 functions? You don't? No wonder you're having trouble. You need to have these 7 functions and they're in an order. So even going right into management itself, there's something. So all of us deal with people one way or another. Let's say you have a guy, he has a hot dog stand, right? That's his living. He sells hot dogs on Fifth Avenue in New York, right? He still has to deal with people. He has to deal with all the customers. He has to deal with all the suppliers. He has to deal with all the people in the government who say you need this and you need that permit or whatever, right? It's still dealing with people. And then he goes home, he has to deal with his wife. So you might say, well, why would he need it? He needs it. So let's say you have some guy, he's got 180 IQ, he makes $10 million a year, and he's the CEO of a major corporation. Okay, and he has a body like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You think, well, he doesn't need the book. Oh, really? His daughter is getting into drugs. His son is getting into fistfights. His wife is cheating on him. His brother-in-law is stealing money from him. You can use this book to straighten out all those things. So it's universally applicable. Anything has to do with people. Everybody has something to do with people, some more than others. So this is really useful stuff. It saves you dead ends. Like I told you about that blonde that I met, right? I could have wasted a lot of time. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've wasted a lot of time on women who turned out went nowhere, you know? A lot of time, and a lot of money too. Okay. And then it was just, well, now that doesn't happen to me. I can figure this out ahead of time. So I know what I'm dealing with. So whether it's upscale people or downscale people, you can meet somebody and say, oh, this guy's high in this scale, high in this scale, high in this is an upscale person. I want this person in my life. And that person will be a benefit to you. Now, is that going to person be high on every scale? No. He's going to be low on a few. But if you know what those are, you can tiptoe around those when they come up and preserve the relationship. Like I have a friend, wonderful person, successful, smart, family man, right? He's what I would call a political extremist. Now, I don't get into that stuff with people, okay? So if he starts getting, I just tiptoe around it. I say, by the way, how's your son? Oh, he's okay. Oh, tell me about it. See, we're out of it. Because I'm not going to get into that. See? So there are people who, have weird ideas, and you need to sort of know how to get around it because that preserves the relationship. So, I've been self-employed my whole life. I had people who worked for me. I still have people who work for me. And so I sort of say, okay, this guy on this scale, not so good. So I know what I'm dealing with and I tiptoe around. I've had clients who came to me from Europe whose first language was not English.
Mm.
I still had to deal with them and help them. And I did. But I was able to see the limitations that they had on language and adjust my language to be at their level of literacy. So it took a little extra work, a little extra concentration, but I was still able to. If I spoke to them the way I'm speaking to you, they would have just taken off. I wouldn't have been able to help them, see? So it depends on the person. You have to, every person is different. Every person is some level on every scale. You know that. So you just
Different
figure
strokes for
where's the,
different folks.
what's that?
Different strokes for different folks.
Right, right. But think about this. Everybody has a blood pressure, right? You have a blood pressure right now. I don't know what it is. What happens when you go to the doctor? One of the first things they do is take your blood pressure. It doesn't matter whether you go because you have a cold, you have a headache, or you broke your foot. They still take your blood pressure. You
The
know
vital
why?
signs.
They know you have one and they don't know what it is. That's what this is like. You know someone is somewhere on the scale of spiritual identity. He's on that scale, and you can figure out what it is. And when you know, you will understand that person better.
Mm.
So you know what you're dealing with. So that's what this is about. It's very useful, it's very practical, and it's not hard to get. People tell you their levels, not only verbally, but the way they carry themselves, their eyes, their movements, you can figure out where the person is. And believe me, because I've been doing this for it's really helps. Like you probably have heard, all Americans know about this, about the conflict between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. You've heard about that, right? The beginning of political parties in the United States was those two guys. They hated one another. Well, they were at different levels on the scale of basic purposes. And that explains a lot. Jefferson was at level 3, Hamilton was at level 2. Those two people are not going to find it easy to get along because their basic purposes are different. Once I understood that, it's crystal clear to me. Because before that, I thought they're both founding fathers, they're both smart men, they're both success. Why would they hate? Now I understand why they couldn't get along. And this went to such an extent that Jefferson left being the Secretary of State, the highest of all the cabinet positions. He left because he just couldn't stand Hamilton. Because Hamilton was like Washington's son. You know what I mean? It was like they were really close. They had like a father-son relationship. Because Hamilton was about the right age to be Washington's son. And so Jefferson, as smart as he was, he couldn't cope with it. He just said, I'm out of here. So there's a lot of things like that that could be understood. And if you read the book, I go through all kinds of examples in the book. This is what it's like. This is a famous person who had that, and so forth. It's not hard to figure out.
I think that's really quite helpful. And of course, your work touches on human potential.
Yes,
I like to say something to people. There's a difference between potentials and credentials, but people are often moved by what they see, right? And what
right.
they see can be equated to credentials.
Yes,
But what can you become is the potential. And of course, a lot of people start up with very massive, colossal potentials, but do not tend to achieve those potentials.
right.
So, a lot of times, in order to achieve your potentials, you need to achieve a certain level of mindset shift.
Yes,
Because there are two basic kinds of mindsets: the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. So if you're operating with a fixed mindset, there is a limit, there is a cap to,
yes,
the level of credentials you're able to achieve with the potentials. So from your research and your wealth of knowledge and experience, what have you identified as, some of the biggest mental barriers people face uh,
The
in
biggest
life?
problem, the biggest problem in human society is that people don't understand people. They don't understand. I'll give you an example. St. Francis of Assisi founded the Franciscan order. His father was a rich merchant. He expected Francis to grow up and just take over the company and continue to be a rich man, right? It's not what Francis wanted. Francis became a saint. He founded the Franciscan order. He had special abilities. And so the father didn't understand the son. And so there was a lot of frustration there. Francis went on, he was interested in transcendence and doing good works. He founded this order. It's still around today. So that's, there was a lack of understanding there. This happens all the time in families where the parents want the kid to become a doctor or a lawyer. He doesn't want that. There's a famous actor, Walter Matthau. You know who he is? Walter Matthau?
No, I'm
Very,
not really a movie person.
very famous actor, brilliant actor, okay? Became very rich. So he was in a movie in 1968 that was a huge hit, and he was the star, and he made a tremendous amount of money. 1968, realized money was different back then. So he went to see his mother after the movie came out. And of course, everybody knew about this movie because it was so big, and she knew he was a star. She said to him, "How much money did you make from this movie?" He said, "About $1 million." That was a lot of money back then. Okay? That's like $1 billion today or something like 100 million, right? And she said to him, "You could have been a doctor, right?" Didn't matter how successful, she was not supportive of it. She wanted him to be a doctor, and that's it. She's not going to hear about it. He makes $1 million, is the biggest star. She still says, "You could have been," she's not understanding him. So it's really helpful in relationships, any kind of relationships, to have this data and to figure it out. Because you can preserve the relationship when you understand the person. Sometimes relationships go awry because people just don't know what they're looking at.
Hmm.
Why does this person do this? Instead of figuring it out with the book, they get all upset and they break up or whatever. And it doesn't have to just be a romantic relationship. It could be a father and son relationship. It could be partners in a business. So I urge you, get the book, learn it, and use it, because it'll make you even smarter than you already are, and will make your life better.
So sometimes, we get surprised by the actions of people. For me, one of the biggest, surprises in human psychological behavior is self-sabotage.
Yes.
And for you, I don't know what would be top of your list, for surprising, behaviorism, but how does the Septimics help people to identify and overcome limiting beliefs?
The septimic data is axiomatically true. Because of that, you can lean on it. You have realizations because you see what it is. So it enables you to advance, because as you are having these insights, you're getting smarter. And because you're smarter, it's easier to use the material. And the more you use the material, the smarter you get. And it just keeps going like that. Just keeps going. Now, there are people who sabotage themselves. They're at level 5 on the scale of basic purposes, which you can see on my website if you want. There's a certain type of person who will sabotage himself. Nothing you can do about that. Now, if he were to figure out that he was at that level, he might be able to move up to the next higher level, and then he would be a normal person. That's possible. But he's certainly not going to do that unless he has the book and sees the material and figures it out. But a lot of those people, social workers think they're going to help everybody, and they're wrong. They can't. There's some people, they're just determined to sabotage themselves, whether it's with drugs or alcohol or driving too fast or eating too much or bad relationships. I mean, there's an infinitude of ways to sabotage yourself. And if you're into that, I feel sorry for the person and for his family because it's going to be hard for them. But there's a lot of people like that.
There are a lot of people like that, and it's constantly amazes me, like what the motivation behind that is. Where I come from, Africa, we tend to attribute, would I say, elements of spirituality into that. For example, people who self-sabotage, who self-harm, they would typically be dismissed as, being possessed with evil spirits. And of course, that's a great way to segue into the next, aspect of your body of work, which covers metaphysics and theology. So how does Septemics align with or differ with these, traditional spiritual teachings?
Well, I don't find it conflicting with anything, and I've paid a lot of attention to that. There is a scale of spiritual identity. It is very important. When you find your level on that scale, it is a very big moment in your life. But also finding other people's levels. Because, there are people who are at lower levels on that scale. It doesn't matter what you say to them, they're not going to get it because they're at that level. And it's important to know the level of a person because you know what you're dealing with then. One's spiritual identity is a big part of who he is. If a person realizes that he's a spiritual being, that is a very different person from somebody who does not realize that. A lot of the really bad things that happen in the world are from people who don't realize they're spiritual beings. They say, "Oh, there's no afterlife, there's no God," so they feel they can just do anything. I think it was Dostoevsky who said in the Brothers Karamazov, he said, "Without God, everything is permissible." That's what you get from these lowlifes. People who go around doing horrible things. Now, of course, there are also crazy people who think God is telling them to murder all of the prostitutes on the street or something, or blow up all the abortion clinics. They're crazy people. So they need, mental health care. But the sane people don't do stuff like that. They might disagree with you, but they're not going to do that stuff. I realize we could keep talking forever.
Wow, it has been a really, really extensive and great session, and I very, very much appreciate you. And of course, I would urge everybody who's worked until now to go grab a copy of your book. I'm going to drop the link to your website, and of course, what are the major sites where the book can be purchased?
You can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Barnes and Nobles. Frankly, it's available wherever books are sold. If you just put the word Septimics into a search engine, you'll get hundreds of responses, including all the people selling the book. Like Acme Bookstore in Dayton, Ohio, comes up because they're selling the book. So it's not hard to find. I mean, Amazon is the biggest company in the world, so that's where a lot of people go. And of course, you can go to Amazon. Just go to Amazon and type in Septimics, and you'll see the page and the picture and the whole explanation and everything.
Oh, interesting. So, how can people reach out to you? Social media?
Well, I would invite your listeners to my website, which is septimics.com, where you can see what many readers have said, what many journalists have written, what the reviews are. You can read sections of the book itself if you wish. And there's even a pre-recorded introduction to Septimics that you can listen to that explains it in 15 minutes. And of course, my contact information is on the website. So you can send me a nasty letter if you wish. Nasty.
Thank you very much once again for your time, sharing your life with us on the podcast today. And of course, from me, it is love and respect to everyone. And of course, please support the podcast, share, like, subscribe. And of course, I'll do my very best to keep bringing you wonderful, insightful episodes. And of course, it's bye from me.